Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in terms of your time zone. I'm delighted to be here with you in, I suppose, a different circumstance with a virtual meeting, but it's still great to be able to speak with you guys. Hopefully, this virtual event, you'll get to hear some of my thoughts, my insights on the transparency side, and then we will have a chance to have a Q&A. So I look forward to that piece. So first off, we're obviously all in a different world. I think the last time I actually traveled was for this conference and for a similar topic in the US. So that's quite a surreal experience now, joining you again here virtually for my European colleagues. But delighted that we can, go through some of this. There's obviously some notes about the introductions, and very quickly, I'm Nirpal. I head up the transparency and disclosure at Certara, and today, hopefully, I'm going to leave you with a few things. Hopefully, I can give you some insight with all of the things that we've been working through on the regulations, the patient movement, and things around patient engagement that have really affected our landscape around transparency. But also, some key pointers around, good planning, both strategically and operationally. So hopefully, those are the key things that you will get out of my particular session. Forgive me, I will be focusing and delving in a little bit into the Health Canada regulation, just because it's the most current. I will speak about the EMA regulations as well. We know that Policy 70 obviously is something that continues to be on pause, and I think with COVID-19, that will probably be extended a little bit further. But we do have some other insights around EMA Policy 43 that I'll bring into the conversation as well. Okay, let's go through this. I initially want to give you a bit of perspective around disclosure. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But really just to give you a bit of my history and perspective as well, and how things have moved in my time in this space, and then let's go through the retrospective and prospective data sharing. As I mentioned, I will be talking about our most recent experience, but I'll weave in some of the European concepts as well. We'll talk about proactive approach to data sharing. Hopefully, this is really where you'll get some really great insights around the agency disclosures, and really the key things that you really want to be considering, and some of the pitfalls that we've seen that are important that you understand, and see how you can navigate around those. I'll talk about prospective disclosure as well, going beyond the regulations. I really want to be talking about the patient's interest in patient movement. Is something that I'm very passionate about, something that we've invested a lot of time and energy in, and I think it resonates across everything that we all do today. And then let me talk a little bit towards the end around the future of disclosure, and what I see in some of the privacy laws that we're seeing, and how you balance that with disclosure. So hopefully that wraps it all up. Quite a lot to get through, I know. I haven't got too much time, so let's just get straight into this. So, history of disclosure. Now, you're in the room, so virtual room, if you like. So, I'm sure many of you share the same passion that I do around transparency. I came into the industry almost 19 years ago now. And very much, focused on clinical development within sponsor organizations. And I chose this path because I felt it was a way in which I could have a meaningful career in something that actually mattered. And this sort of movement towards, externalizing information and really sort of taking siloed information that that I was very much involved in sort of managing with other teams at the sponsor organisation I was at. Being able to sort of work through the collective information that we were gathering, but being able to really get it out to a wider audience, whether it was patients, whether it was academics, further research. That is something that I'm really pleased and sort of happy I was able to get into that space, and it sort of progressed my journey. So I'm sure you guys are all the same, and we've seen that evolution, haven't we? In which it was started off very basic, trying to get some study information, a little bit more visible, and then we've seen a snowballing effect in which we've seen a lot more requirements to get further information published out there. The data movements, the EMA's drive around reporting, and it continues to evolve at a pace, and all underpinned with a lot of movement around patients needing to be part of and wanting to be part of more of the R&D process, if you like. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So a bit of perspective on history, but probably showing my age a little bit as well. Just a very quick recap. The key policies that my topic focuses on is really some of that report disclosure. So I know there's a lot of other dynamics, and we might touch on some of them, but the key things are, the overviews, the summaries, and the study reports that have been required from EMA initially, and then with Health Canada more recently. So that's the context in which we'll speak about this. So retrospective requests from Health Canada is something that we've really seen grow. So a difference we had within the Health Canada's regulation was the fact that though it had a focus on prospective studies, prospective reporting that would be required to be published, there was a sort of a stipulation around the public in Canada being able to request retrospective reports, and really no time bound as far as we've seen on how far that could go back. And it's something for us to consider within Europe, right? Because within policy 43, we have a mechanism that we've had for a long time, in which we can get requests come through for all types of reporting information, and grant you that doesn't go to a wider public, but it goes to some requester to receive that information, and that has continued on. We've really sort of seen a lot of requests that we've had to work on, and I'll touch on maybe some of those challenges if we've got time a little bit later. But the challenges that you have with retrospective is just not knowing what's coming. So when we've worked with sponsors, it's how do we help mobilize when these requests do come through? What systematic process can we have in place to try and manage those types of requests? So planning really is difficult, but what you can try and do is plan for things that could happen, some scenario planning, some sort of mechanism in which you can react and have a systematic way of leading a process when you do get a request. We're never told where the request comes from. I have raised it before with representations from Health Canada. It absolutely makes sense. You would not want to share any personal information about requesters, but it would be fantastic to get some insight as to trends around who's asking for this information. I know we're all investing a lot of energy, a lot of time to put a lot of this information out. So trying to understand some of the nuances around where they might be coming from, in terms of patterns of groupings and and all those sort of things, I think could be quite insightful, but we don't have that yet. And you know, the reports from a Health Canada perspective, at least from a a consistency perspective, we know what they are. They typically are going to be the same documentation set that we have in the overall guidance anyway. So at least we know from a from a sort of preparation perspective what we're going to receive. Now these have been very challenging requests. Some of these are paper-based submissions. I know we've had many that we've worked with sponsors on from the 80s and 90s. So you can imagine the challenges around first off having the agency digitalize these and the quality that you actually get from those, and then trying to work through scanned documents and scanned pages. It's absolutely a challenge on time as well as processing to try and handle some of those things. And also a very important factor is sort of whatever processes, systems that you have in place, and you know who you partner with. Some of these old studies just don't follow any conventions that we have today in terms of ICH and some of the good standards that we have now. So there's an interpretation I'm sure we make with the way we deal with things now, but it's still quite a process to try and align all of those things. And timelines, look, Health Canada as well as every other agency is absolutely sort of swamped with dealing with COVID-19. So we have seen a slowdown in requests, and the retrospective requests particularly have been impacted because of the nature of having to have them digitalized by the agency. And like us, they have staff that are predominantly now working from home. Having those capabilities to do some of that work has just been a lot more challenging for them to be offsite. So that is some of the aspects that we've really been seeing. Okay, so this is just a summary. I'm sure you're going to get these slides of sort of what I've just gone through, and sort of really pinpointing some of the disclosure challenges that we have. Let me dive into now the prospective disclosures, and the considerations and the challenges that I think are really important to be considering. So when we're trying to structure how we best work through programs of transparency, the things to think about are initially, does the submission come into scope of any other agency? So whether we're thinking about EMA, Health Canada, and many other things that seem to be happening more globally, have that in mind initially, because that really feeds into any sort of rework. We all live in a global environment now, so disclosure within within a particular territory really does not make a difference. It's in the public domain, so that is very critical to try and assess. And what that allows you to do then is to make some assumptions about the approach you can take. If you know that you're potentially hitting other agencies, it will lead you to make decisions that try and cater more broadly and try and minimize the amount of potential rework you may have to do. Is there any commitments to share this data anywhere else? That's really important. So, understanding, what might have already been put out into the public domain, what is, in different formats, something really important to consider, because, what we find is if you go through that process and that hasn't been worked through very well, you're just going to get pushback from the agencies, because they will look to see whether some of the assertions that you're making and the request to not disclose certain information. If it in some way has gone out into the public domain, you really, are advised to try and work those out earlier. It's so much easier, so much more cost effective the earlier you realise, your boundaries, if you like, on some of these things. Work with the regulators around understanding what studies are in scope. Absolutely critical, because we've had so many instances where there might be some cross-reference studies or you're not quite sure, and if you've not been proactive to really try and meet the agencies regularly to try and work out and confirm the scope, then you just run the risk of either having worked through processing where you didn't need to, or having questions asked once you've got through your first initial submission set and have to put in a whole load of rework. It really is a smart move to try and work out a lot of those things as early as you can. I think that the last point on my considerations is just really, sort of echo some of the things that maybe I've already mentioned, is just ensuring that, there isn't anything from a publications perspective that you might have already disclosed. And, we see that, maybe not so much in the PPD type of information, patient information, but, a lot of things in consideration of company confidential information, where you might consider things that are really important for your organization, only to find out that in some way or form of fashion you've already disclosed it. Some of the challenges, the sort of key learnings is the silo mentality. Look, I know this is like a buzz thing. We talk about it in so many different aspects of what we all do, but really from a transparency perspective, if you're working within each specific regulatory requirement and request in a silo, you're going to get stuck with what you're trying to disclose. And something that we've really tried to hone in on is think about this strategically, really think about the commitments that you feel as an organization, your position that you have within transparency, what you want to make. Really important for you guys to consider that, so that everything else underpins that strategy, and it leads into some of the considerations you make around assumptions you're making around disclosure of that information. And having internal silos again, there's privacy, there's innovation groups, there's publications, there's a whole movement around patient centricity. We're seeing a lot more organizations have particular roles in that. But if you're all sort of working in your different sort of aspects around what you want to sort of put out in terms of information, again, you get a little bit stuck with sort of overlapping in information that needs to get out into the public domain. So really try and work through some of those groupings together, understand what your organizations are doing, all of these different strands, so that you can bring it all together. Mechanisms to track all sponsor TND obligations, really important from a planning perspective. Really know what you're having to disclose and centralize this so that you've got a really good view as to how to do that. Good planning, it's so important, so that you can sort of work through who needs to do what. With all of the COVID-19's only extended the amount of commitment that we all have had. We're trying to accelerate a lot of the development work that we do. So time pressure is there, more bigger than it ever has been. So good planning, knowing where everything fits within your global obligations, really important. Educating your organization is really key as well, around understanding how the teams are structured around transparency, understanding all of the levers, all of the different stakeholders, when you want to use those SMEs to review certain parts of information, whether it's sort of validating the approaches you're going to take for the patient data, or whether it's really strategically looking at your IP and the CCI. you need to know when to engage with your SMEs and, you know, sort of systematically when they're going to review things, so that it's just not all over the place and you've got them out of sequence, and you know, you just make the process you know, much more harder. And most of you are working with the likes of us as vendors, and you know, really just pre-planning out how you're going to work with everybody within, you know, external and internal organization is really key. Again, you know, the challenge is, you know, sponsors typically want operational guidance. That's what we've seen, but you know, think about a risk-based strategy on how you're doing all of this, because if you're operationally just thinking about each and every component, you know, and you know, looking at, we must you know, move to this types of you know, mechanism or techniques, you know, you run the risk of really not using an informed strategy to try and guide when you should use what. How do you want to you know, sort of engage with the regulators, and once you know, what's your negotiation positions and all those sort of things. Very important. Lack of sponsor experience in the process and utilizing the tools and software available. So you know, there is again, speaks to some of the educational parts of this, but you know, there's tools, there's techniques, there's you know, sort of support you can get. Trying to get a good understanding of those is really important. One of the most fundamental pieces here is really, you know, you're all making decisions across R&D on your service providers strategically, why you might be using them, certain vendors in certain positions, and technology providers. And you know, you may have made decisions based on, you know, certain criteria, or sort of trying to group things that you feel are important to your organization. So it's really important that you have your choice to independently select them from each other. You know, what I've seen is, you know, where, you know, my side of the industry tries to sort of enforce, you use certain technology and it must be bundled with a certain service offering. It's just not going to work with some of the choices that you need to make independently. So as a sponsor organization, you know, be willing to have those, you know, those decision points or discussions that you want to make sure that, you know, that the decisions you made, you know, our side, the vendor side, sort of collaborates with that and understands that and can sort of, you know, nurture and work through a model that, you know, sort of takes into account some of those decisions you're making and decouples, you know, service decisions that you're making with technology. So just something that we've been seeing. Okay, proactive approach to data sharing. Again, I've talked about some of these themes, but real quick, you know, here's a maturity assessment that I think is really useful for us to evaluate. You know, we have existence of a study, the disclosure of a study, very basic part of your maturity. Then we're going to get into the summary of the results. So that is the next level of sophistication that we have. And then on going into sort of more details about those methods and results. Where we're trying to shift is those upper levels of this diagram, which is aggregating results for patients, really taking into account the drive with, you know, that we have, our commitment to patients. They're hungry for this information. They really want to know, you know, how they can participate in conditions they have, or as caregivers, how they can sort of really understand the disease state. So, you know, getting into individualized patient data disclosure is going to be sort of where we're trying to head. Contextualizing the information is, I think, is really, you know, where we want to underpin all of this for all of the stakeholders. So really giving specific information to the people that need it in the way they need it, I think is really the maturity that we're all trying to get to, you know, across the different agencies we work with. Put the patients at the heart of R&D and transparency. Absolutely. I know it seems to be the most obvious thing to say, but, you know, engaging with broader patient groups, something that I know that we've really been putting a lot of focus on. Like, how do we embed patients in the heart of R&D and all of the aspects around transparency. How do we get their views as early as possible? And that then should underpin academics and researchers and what they're trying to do. It really should still focus always on, how that serves the patient. Okay, let me sort of try and conclude real quick with what the strategy should look like. So really, we talked about some of the operations, some of the planning side of things, but really, have your patient engagement plan, have your corporate disclosure strategy, really understand what your peers are doing, where you want to be as an organization with transparency, and then embed that into every decision you're making around this, and think about innovation in all aspects of what you're doing within R&D, within transparency, and then how that fits in with your overall model. And then you have these key sort of aspects that you have trial registration, results posting. We have the study reports that we've been talking about, data sharing, patient summaries, really getting into heart of like, how do we sort of get some of this messaging out to patients in a way they can understand. That is the aspects you need to make sure that are encompassing into your strategic vision of how you want transparency to look like. Okay, regulations and the industry, real quick. I know I'm running out of time really quickly. So here's all of the organizations that are really looking at it, non-for-profit organizations really pushing for this data to be put out there. You have certain groups that have been formed within Europe and PIA and others that are really trying to sort of provide some insight, some structure, some guidance around how we manage transparency. But here's some of the regulation updates. So the FDA continues to support transparency. That is something that we've seen. They closed out their pilot for reporting, but what we have seen is, interestingly, they've actually put it out back to industry, and they feel that the industry needs to come up with a standard in which we can publish report data and all those sort of things, take it out of the agency remit, and stop having agencies needing to develop, each and every one of them having to develop their own sort of designed transparency initiative, guideline, policy, law, is to see whether the industry can take a lead and have an independent repository. Fascinating how that might change the way we think about things. They're also going through some modernization that they've been asking the public to provide some insight on. EMA, we've talked about it. 40 feet continues. Policy 70 really has been something that we've been waiting with. I think if it wasn't for COVID-19, we might have seen this back by now. I think it definitely is going to be into the latter part of the year. Patient-driven transparency in COVID-19, really, that is the focus of everything that we've been talking about, most recently. So we're seeing, again, FDA first pilot around, patient-reported outcomes, so really putting the patients at the heart of, a lot of research that's been done. And, the world is waiting for promising therapies and vaccines. And trying to get some really great news for all of us, so that we can try and get out of a lot of the sort of crisis that we all globally are in. But there's a challenge around data being siloed and not being available for that type of research. Certara expanding COVID-19 and putting platforms together to research data, absolutely fundamental thing around continue to share data. And FDA again, first patient-focused drug development guideline. That guideline is now available and really sort of puts in place a mechanism in which we can understand how we should be engaging with patients. And then some questions out there. Are COVID-19 related trials that have never posted results. So how does that fit in with everything we've been thinking about and what's important to us, making that data available, and with COVID-19 trials maybe not even having that result data published? Absolutely fundamental questions from BMJ. Should doctors even prescribe data where the data hasn't been fully publicly available? Really questioning some of the things that we've been thinking about. And really, the Pharma Times really focusing on the changing landscape around, data capture and reporting with COVID-19, putting a real focus on all the things that we've been thinking about for such a long time. I'm going to end there. We've got some good pharma scorecard by Ethics International. I always put it out there that they're really looking, and they're just one example of a group that's looking into ensuring that sponsors are good citizens into publishing information. It's just a snapshot of some of the evaluations that they've been doing around sponsors, and I haven't heard so much about what they're doing quite recently, but I'll keep an eye on them and see the sort of data that they're looking into and what they're publishing. Okay, so hopefully that ends the presentation, and we have some time for questions. So hopefully I've addressed some of the objectives around, the effects we're having around regulations, obviously brought in a bit about COVID-19, but good strategic planning, and good operational planning really at the key, and also making your decisions about providers, service providers and technology, and having your choice really fundamental. Drive the industry so that you can make the choices of what you decide, rather than having to be pigeonholed into using a certain approach just for one particular part of your, the R&D sphere of things that we're all looking at. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the Q&A session.
Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be our session Q&A for delve into the prospective and retrospective analyses of clinical data disclosure and data sharing requirements. Nirpal, thank you so much for a great presentation and for being here today. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please be sure to open your session in full screen, click on Q&A, and then the orange plus button. We have some great questions already in the queue, but if you have something you'd really like to ask our speaker, please be sure to submit that. Nirpal, one of the first questions that we have today is that you mentioned EMA policy for 0043. Have you seen many requests still coming through during Brexit and the COVID-19 period? And anything you can share on what they've been asking for?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we absolutely have had many 43 requests coming through. So that really hasn't stopped. I would say there was a period in which maybe we didn't receive so many at the earlier onset. But we've been receiving requests for summary documents and study reports. The thing that has been interesting is the process has been slightly different. We've been getting a lot more requests to provide further details on the justification report. So we've really had to sort of make some adjustments to provide now a lot more PPD references in those tables than we used to. Used to focus primarily on what we were sort of the deltas and the CCI elements.
Awesome. And then one question that's actually getting a couple upvotes on our system is what should sponsors be thinking about if they're trying to formulate their T and D objectives and strategy?
Yeah, this is really critical. You really need to be thinking about which agencies you're going to file in first and foremost. Even if it's in the future, it's so important to recognize more than ever that we're in a sort of a global world and a global information sort of environment in which disclosure in one territory does have impact on things you're doing in another. So really important to think about that at the onset. Any likelihood of going to other agencies, have a think about what sort of policies and guidelines and laws that might impact that particular region, and take it into account, because the thing is, what you want to try and do is minimize the amount of rework you do and try and be as consistent as you can. So trying to work through some of those scenarios will help you understand what's the lowest common denominators, what do I need to make sure I put in terms of my approach, to anonymization, based on the fact that if I use this in another for another agency, can I use it almost as it is, or really minimizing the amount of adjustments I need to make to it.
Awesome. A new question that just came in is the UK is developing its own registry as well. Do you have more information about this?
Yeah, so in terms of MHRA, I mean, at the moment they've sort of signaled that they would like sponsors to follow clinicaltrials.gov in the US as the default for disclosing results and initial publication. So that's an important standard they've made. They've also, suggested the sort of standard body that's used for publications as a mechanism for again publishing, your results. So they've made it quite clear that's the direction they're going to follow for now. If you do have European patients, then of course you'd still follow and disclose in UTRA-CT and those sort of aspects. So early days, signaling that they're looking for more of a US bias and a more of an independent bias towards putting that information out. How it relates to reports at this stage is quite early to say. I haven't really seen real clear direction on that yet. Obviously with EMA, still having their policy 70, not quite active yet. Maybe the timings of that will sort of shake out, what guidance we get from MHRA.
Perfect. And then just to wrap up, we do have a couple questions, a couple more questions related to the EMA. So one is if they're doing anything in transparency in regard to COVID-19. Do you expect policy 70 to come back soon? And if there will be any approaches for their backlog of submissions?
Yeah, so obviously we've all, everyone who's had an interest in transparency has been following this, as closely as we can, and where we've had opportunities to, to really sort of probe EMA representatives of what they are planning to do. I think there was conversations about potentially policy 70 coming back in some way, the middle of this year, but COVID-19's really derailed that. So I don't see anything happening, this year for sure. There was conversations, of course, around what approach they would take. There is a huge backlog, so much bigger than when they started. It looks like, and again, sort of what we've been hearing from, sort of conversations they've had with Fuse and other institutions, is that they may follow something closer to Health Canada's PRCIs, which is really having a retrospective on request. So that's a possible change that we might see, and focusing more on prospective. Now that would be very interesting to find out. Well, then how does that correlate with policy 43, in which you can make retrospective requests? Will we see some sort of merging in that? But COVID-19, I think, we've seen some very recent statements now from EMA that they want to have transparency sort of back up and running for COVID-19 related submissions. So once an MAA is put through for a COVID-19 related submission, then you will be required to publish your reports as far as we can see. So it looks like, though policy 70 at this moment in time is not sort of coming back completely, there is potentially going to be a subset of that up and running, for these particular trials. And again, that might be a really good early indicator around how they want to receive this information, and what they've been thinking about during the pause. in terms of approach and in terms of the rules and the guidances. If there is going to be any adjustments, I think it's probably going to be minimal to just focus on getting that information out as quick as possible for COVID-19. But let's see, that may happen. So I think EMA Policy 70, I think we're all expecting it to come at some point in maybe a slightly different guise. But I think really we're looking at middle next year at the earliest at this point.